Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Geopolitical and Military News. In this video, we will talk about nuclear weapons in space and why Putin's alleged intention to do so is seen as a serious risk to the national security of the United States. On Wednesday, February 14th, the intelligence sector of the United States Congress released a note, at the very least unusual, in which it referred to a threat classified as a serious risk to national security and requested President Biden to declassify and make security reports and alerts public. Although relatively common, these alerts are always treated very discreetly and secretly, so the request for the alert to be declassified and made public attracted everyone's attention. Shortly thereafter, several news sources began to report that this security alert was related to Russia. More specifically, with a threat from Russia in space. In a quick press conference, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to the United States, did not give details about the threat, but many newspapers, referring to sources connected to Congress and the White House, reported that the nature of the threat would be Vladimir Putin's intention to place nuclear weapons in orbit. In a world where Russia and the United States each possess more than 6,000 nuclear warheads, why is the placement of nuclear weapons in orbit seen as a serious threat to the national security of the United States? As is widely known, for many decades space has become a supporting actor in conflicts on the planet, with major powers using space to support air, land, and naval operations, mainly through communication and the supply of important intelligence data, such as photos showing the strength and disposition of the enemy. In the case of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, despite Ukrainians not having military satellites, they are obtaining daily information from the extensive network of military satellites of the United States and allied nations, such as the United Kingdom. Through this information, Ukraine is able to select and attack important Russian targets, such as air defense launchers and vessels anchored in ports and military bases. Thanks to these satellites, Ukrainians have attacked and destroyed highly valuable Russian equipment, something that, as you can well imagine, deeply bothers Russia. However, despite this important military support role, space has never turned into a battlefield. In fact, even at the height of the Cold War and the space race, the United States and the Soviet Union never exchanged shots or attacked each other in space. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was signed, aiming to ban the use of nuclear weapons in space. However, the treaty does not prohibit the use of conventional, non-nuclear weapons. As in the 1960s, the concept of a space station was beginning to emerge, with many plans and projects in the United States and the Soviet Union. The greatest fear was the construction of large orbital platforms for launching nuclear missiles against targets on land. With that treaty of 1967 preventing this, today in 2024, that fear still exists. However, there is another equally serious one that involves the use of nuclear weapons against military satellites, which, as I mentioned earlier, play an increasingly important role in modern conflicts, ultimately turning these satellites into highly prioritized targets. But what is the advantage of using nuclear weapons, which, as I said, are banned from being used in space? Why not simply use conventional weapons, such as projectile launchers in orbit? The distances between objects are huge, and satellites in low Earth orbit travel at staggering speeds, which can be almost 30,000 kilometers per hour. This means that, to hit a satellite with conventional weapons, there are only two options. The first is to launch a missile from land, air, or sea, with this missile rising hundreds of kilometers until it hits the target satellite, a highly complex operation, since in practice the goal is to hit a small object flying at almost 30,000 kilometers per hour with another smaller object also flying at 30,000 kilometers per hour. Even with all current computational systems, this is a complex operation, with many chances of missing the target. The other option involves the use of an attack spacecraft, however, only to approach a target satellite. This vehicle would consume almost all of its fuel, making its reuse in other attacks impossible. Additionally, as soon as it is detected on the ground that a spacecraft is maneuvering in orbit to attack satellites, anti-satellite missiles would be launched to shoot it down. However, if the aggressor nation uses nuclear weapons, the aggressed country may not have time to react, for several reasons. In the atmosphere, one of the most terrible effects of a nuclear explosion is the gigantic displacement of air from the shockwave. Depending on the bomb's power, winds at hypersonic speeds and temperatures of thousands of degrees destroy and level everything in a radius that can be several kilometers around the epicenter. But in space, as there is no atmosphere, this air displacement does not exist. The main effect of a nuclear detonation in space is heat and, primarily, the electromagnetic pulse. A high-power nuclear detonation, if carried out in a crowded and full orbital route, with satellites relatively close to each other, is capable of emitting an electromagnetic pulse with the potential to fry the electronic circuits of everything within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. Additionally, this electromagnetic pulse also affects what is on the ground, destroying electronic circuits and seriously affecting communications. Most critical defense systems usually have shielding that protects them from electromagnetic pulses, but units deployed on the ground would lose all of their communication means, potentially leaving entire armies authentically blind, deaf, and mute. A high-power nuclear warhead, if detonated 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface, is capable of generating an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to affect electronic equipment within a radius of several hundred or even thousands of kilometers. That is, only a handful of nuclear bombs would be enough to destroy a large part of the satellites in orbit and, at the same time, render virtually all electronic and communication systems on the ground useless. In countries like the United States, in a scenario involving this type of attack, armies on the ground, even the most modern ones, would be catapulted back to the 19th century, with millions of civilians thrown into complete chaos, without electricity, communication, and adequate means of transportation. Therefore, if Vladimir Putin has the same intention of placing nuclear weapons in orbit, it is clearly a major threat to the security not only of the United States but of the entire planet. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now to support us, and leave your like. Until next time.